All right, buckle up for the deep dive. Today, we're heading straight into the creepy heart of Dumpling Farm, the setting for Wicked Witches, that 2018 horror flick.
Ooh, okay.
You guys sent in a ton of reviews and articles all about how Wicked Witches takes, like, a totally fresh look at witches.
Interesting.
Yeah, and let me tell you, from what I've seen, we're definitely leaving those fairy tale witches behind.
Right, yeah, it definitely looks like Wicked Witches ditches all the usual stuff,
Like what?
like the spell books and broomsticks. Instead, they go for something way more primal, maybe even like monstrous.
Yeah, I'm seeing flesh-eating witches here.
Whoa.
That's not your typical cauldron-stirring grandma, right? It's almost like they've got this, like, zombie vibe, but with a supernatural twist.
Huh.
I'm also seeing some comparisons to The Ring, so I'm super curious to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that's interesting. And don't forget about that ending, right?
Oh, yeah, the ending. It looks like Wicked Witches is all about leaving you with questions, not answers.
Classic horror move. Really taps into those primal fears.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We've got Mark.
Okay.
He heads to Dumpling Farm looking for some peace and quiet after a bad breakup. That classic escape to the countryside thing.
Yeah, I get it.
But surprise, surprise, instead of finding peace, he ends up tangled up with, well, a whole bunch of demonic witches who have made themselves at home.
Oh.
And these witches aren't exactly brewing up love potions. They're crazing something a little darker.
Let me guess. They're hungry.
You got it.
Yeah.
Human flesh is on the menu at Dumpling Farm.
Yikes.
So, yeah, Wicked Witches is definitely not your typical witch flick. We're not dealing with the whole, like, cunning sorceress thing here.
So these witches are different.
Totally different. They're driven by pure instinct, almost like animals.
Hmm.
So it's more of a visceral, survival horror vibe than a battle of wits.
Makes you wonder if they're trying to tap into something deeper, like a more primal fear.
You might be onto something. The witch, going back to old folklore, has always been about power and fear, right?
Yeah.
And it seems like Wicked Witches strips away all the, like, magic and lore.
So it's just raw fear.
Yeah, just the witch at her most basic and maybe her most terrifying, a predator.
Interesting. So like a straight up monster movie.
And get this, these predatory witches have, like, a whole hierarchy.
Really?
Yeah, they've got a leader called the priestess, adds a whole layer of mystery.
Yeah, for sure. Like, what's her role in all of this? Is she the one behind it all?
Right. It's like the movie loves to keep you guessing. But hey, let's talk about the guy behind the camera for a sec.
Okay.
Martin J. Pickering, he co-wrote and directed this thing.
Right.
And he's known for his, like, atmospheric horror style.
Atmospheric.
Yeah, he's more into creating a mood, dread and unease rather than showing you every gory detail.
So he likes to let your imagination run wild.
Exactly. And let me tell you, it's already working on me, and we haven't even gotten to the actual movie.
So just from the reviews.
Yeah, from what I'm seeing, Pickering is all about visual storytelling and Wicked Witches. He uses these long, drawn-out shots, hardly any dialogue, and lots of darkness and shadows.
He wants you to feel it, huh?
Yeah, he wants you to feel trapped, isolated, like the characters.
And I bet he nails it.
Oh, he does. And get this, there are these references to The Ring as a visual influence.
The Ring? Okay, so we're talking creepy, right?
Super creepy. Apparently, the way the witches move is, like, jerky and unnatural.
Oh, I get it. It's like you know that something's wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it.
Exactly. It's like that primal fear of the unknown. I'm getting The Ring shivers just thinking about it.
Wow, that's powerful. So it sounds like Pickering isn't afraid to use those subtle cues to freak you out.
He's a master of it. And he doesn't stop there. He loves to use what they call implied horror. Like, he leaves a lot to your imagination.
Oh, that's even scarier. Like when you hear a weird noise at night and your mind goes to the worst possible place.
Exactly. It's all about that anticipation, the fear of what you don't see.
Okay, so we've got creepy witches, a master of atmosphere, and now let's talk about our main guy, Mark.
Right, Mark. Played by Duncan Casey.
And what's his deal?
Well, he's already vulnerable after that breakup.
Right.
And then he walks right into this nightmare at Dumpling Farm. He's like our emotional anchor in all of this.
Yeah.
We experience the horror through him.
I can see that.
And from what I'm reading, Duncan Casey totally nails it. He shows us Mark's desperation and the sheer terror of facing these, monstrous creatures.
Yeah, you need a strong actor to pull that off, to make you feel that fear.
And it sounds like he does. A lot of the reviews praise Casey for making the supernatural feel real. Grounding it in those human emotions.
That's so important in horror, right? You have to connect with the characters, feel what they're feeling.
Totally. It's like those classic horror movie moments, where you're yelling at the screen, don't go in there. But they do, and it all goes wrong.
Happens every time. So, in a way, Mark's escape to the country backfires spectacularly.
Big time. He ends up in a situation way more terrifying than what he was running from.
Oof, that's rough. And I bet that feeling of being trapped, of having nowhere to go, is amped up by where the movie takes place.
You're so right. Dumpling Farm, it's isolated, rural, almost like a character itself.
Yeah, I can see that. Like it's reflecting Mark's inner turmoil.
It totally is. It's like the farm is a physical representation of his mental state. Cut off, surrounded by darkness, facing these relentless predatory forces.
Wow, that's a cool way to look at it.
Mm.
And you know what else adds to that feeling of being trapped?
What
The fact that there's barely any dialogue in this film. Pickering lets the visuals and the sounds tell the story.
So it's less about explaining things and more about evoking a feeling, a mood.
Exactly. He uses those long, lingering shots, the sudden transitions, the eerie landscapes, all to build suspense and keep you on edge.
So Wicked Witches is like a masterclass in atmospheric horror, using every trick in the book to unsettle you.
Sounds like it. And we haven't even gotten to the ending yet, the one that leaves you hanging.
I know, right? I can't wait to hear what our listener thinks about that ending.
Me too. But before we do that, maybe we should dig a little deeper into this world. We've talked about those killer witches and the director's style.
It's a setting.
You're right, the setting. But how does it all come together to reinvent what we think of when we think of a witch?
That's a great question, and I think it'll lead us to some really cool insights. But first, there's another character we need to bring into the mix.
Ooh, who's that?
Ian, Mark's friend. His story adds a whole other level of, tragedy and terror to Wicked Witches.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. So what happens to him?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ian gets caught up in all the witchy business.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pretty.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes, almost like a puppet for them, like they're pulling the strings.
That's awful. So they're not just mindless monsters. They can manipulate people, too.
Exactly. It adds this whole layer of, tragedy to the story. It reminds you that they're not just out for blood. They're playing with people's lives, corrupting everything they touch.
And how does that play out in the movie?
Well, Ian's behavior becomes super unpredictable, really erratic, which, just feeds into that constant sense of unease that Pickering is so good at creating.
Like you can never quite relax because you know something bad's going to happen.
Right. You're always on edge. And it's that unpredictability that makes this movie stand out. It's not just another monster flick.
It's more psychological.
Exactly. And speaking of monsters, it's interesting how this movie plays with our expectations of what a witch is. Right?
Yeah, for sure. We're so used to seeing witches as powerful, almost glamorous figures in pop culture, right? But Wicked Witches throws that all out the window.
Right. They're like animals. Pure instinct. It's like going back to those old folk tales where the witch was a symbol of danger, darkness, like the untamed parts of nature.
So it's a more primal kind of horror. Do you think that was intentional? Like they're trying to reclaim the witch as a figure of true horror, not something fantastical or fun?
Yeah, I think you could definitely see it that way. And it might even reflect some of our modern anxieties, We live in a world where things feel really uncertain, out of control, and maybe these primal, uncontrollable witches, they tap into that fear.
It makes you think, yeah. And, the reviews for this movie, they're all over the place. Some people loved it, some hated it.
Yeah, I noticed that too. Why do you think that is?
I think some critics felt like it focused too much on the atmosphere, on implying things, and not enough on the story or the characters.
But other people love that, right?
Right. They praised the film's originality, the visuals, Duncan Casey's performance. So I think it comes down to what you're looking for in a horror movie. If you like ambiguity, a slow burn, then you'll probably enjoy this.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. But speaking of ambiguity, we have to talk about that ending, the one that leaves you with a million questions.
Oh, yeah, we can't skip that. What did you make of it?
Well, it's clear the filmmakers did that on purpose. They wanted to leave us wondering, to force us to think about what it all means, what might happen next.
And some people might find that frustrating, right? But I think it's brilliant. It makes the horror stick with you even after the movie's over.
Totally. It's like they planted a seed of doubt,
Uh-huh.
Makes you question whether any place is truly safe. And that's what good horror does, right? It's not about the scares. It's about the unease, the questions that stay with you.
Exactly. And that feeling of unease is amped up by the isolation in the film. Mark being out in the countryside, cut off from everyone. It makes him so much more vulnerable.
It's like the movie saying that isolation can create monsters, both inside us and out in the world. And that's something we can all relate to, right?
Yeah, we all have our own demons to face, and sometimes being alone with them is the scariest thing of all. And it's interesting to think about that idea of isolation in the context of witches,
How so?
Well, witches have always been seen as outsiders, rebels, people on the fringes of society.
Ah, so the movie is maybe making a connection between being isolated from society and becoming a monster.
Yeah, maybe it is. And that adds another layer to the whole thing, right? We tend to fear what we don't understand, what's different from us.
And that fear can be twisted, manipulated, turned into something truly monstrous.
Which brings us right back to Wicked Witches, right? It's not just a supernatural story. It's about our own anxieties, about the unknown, about losing control, and how isolation can warp our perception of things.
It's a film that, even though people had mixed reactions to it, It keeps people talking. It challenges what we expect from horror.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It's not about cheap scares. It's about exploring the darker parts of our minds, the things that really frighten us on a deep level.
And it does all that with a visual style that's just haunting. The way the camera lingers, those unsettling movements, the sound, it all adds to that feeling of unease that runs through the entire film.
It's like the movie itself is a curse, you know? It gets under your skin and stays there.
That's the sign of a good horror film, for sure.
Definitely. So if you're looking for a horror movie that messes with your head, that's more about atmosphere than gore, then Wicked Witches might be for you.
But just a warning, it might give you nightmares.
And you might start checking behind you the next time you're alone in the dark.
You never know what's lurking in the shadows.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. We talked about those flesh-eating witches, the director's style, that crazy ending.
We even touched on some bigger ideas, like isolation and the psychology of horror.
And even though it might not be everyone's cup of tea, Wicked Witches is definitely a unique film.
So what stood out to you the most? Was it the witches themselves, the atmosphere, that ambiguous ending? What really got under your skin?
We want to know. And remember, this whole deep dive came from you. You wanted to understand this film, so what clicked for you?
Yeah, it's amazing how one movie can spark so many different reactions and interpretations, right?
It's true. It really is. And I think that's what makes horror so cool, you know? It's like it holds up a mirror to our own fears.
Totally. And with Wicked Witches, it feels like that mirror is showing us something pretty primal, right?
Yeah, like our fear of the unknown, the things we can't control, and how being alone, how being isolated can like twist things into something really scary.
It's like they took those classic witch stories we all know and stripped away all the fairy tale stuff.
And what's left is pure horror.
The kind that feels a little too real, you know?
And there's no easy way out in this movie, no magic wand to make everything okay. It's all about survival.
Yeah, about instinct, about facing the darkness head on. Which brings us to our final thought for you guys today. And it might be the most chilling one yet.
Uh-oh, lay it on me. After everything we've talked about, we have to ask. Could you survive a night at Dumpling Farm?
Oh, wow, yeah. That's a good one.
Put yourself in Mark's shoes, right? You're alone, surrounded by darkness, and those creatures are relentless.
I don't know. Would you have what it takes to face them?
To outsmart them?
Or even to, hold on to who you are, to your humanity, when everything around you is so dark?
That's a great question. And it goes beyond the movie, right? It's about how we all deal with the unknown, with the scary stuff. So there you have it. That was our deep dive into Wicked Witches, a film that's more about chills than, like, jump scares and gore.
A film that reminds us that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves, through our fears, our isolation, and the things we don't want to face.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this creepy journey into the world of Wicked Witches.
And until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and maybe sleep with the lights on. You never know.
See you next time.